it's true. Your team might be really close to customers. You might have a very open dialogue with your customer base. Lots of conversations may be happening, but it's very easy to get lost or not be able to see the forest for the trees, having all of those data points. So all of this said, this objection of we already know our customers, it's like, yes, but do you know that critical information about your customers? Do you have that context in which they make decisions, in which that need for your solution comes about in their life? You may know a lot about your customers, but do you know what is important to know?
Welcome to the Forget the Funnel podcast, where our goal is to help you as a SaaS leader finally stop guessing, understand your best customers, and drive more predictable recurring revenue. We're Gia and Claire, founders of Forget the Funnel, a product marketing and growth consultancy that helps SaaS businesses learn from their best customers, map and measure their experiences, and unlock their best levers for growth. So if you're looking to help your team make smarter decisions, this show is for you.
So today we're talking about resistance to research, which is something we've touched on before, but this episode is an opportunity for us to really dive into the specifics. Not only what are the common objections that we see SaaS teams coming up against when trying to kick off a research project, but also kind of where do those potentially come from and how can you move past them? So to kind of set the stage here, the first one we'll cover is an internal assumption that we already know enough about our customers to move forward. The second is this is going to take a lot of time and we don't have time to waste. Let's move. The third is running qualitative research, is doing interviews and or surveys really enough to be valuable? And then the fourth is something I know that just in your and my conversations, you've been seeing more often in initial calls with executive teams, which is our current customer base doesn't actually represent who we're trying to target. And so we're not really confident there's much to be learned from our existing customer base. That's our outline.
Also, I just want to add in for funsies here that this is the first episode that we're recording with new haircuts.
Both of us.
Both of us, exactly, which is completely unrelated to the topic at hand and has no bearing whatsoever on the content. But I thought it was pretty funny that we both have haircuts at the same time. And if anybody has watched our material for any amount of time, you know that Claire's hair has been fun to follow for a few years. If you go back to our old material, she's got pink, very extreme short hair at one point. Anyways,
very useful for tracking the passage of time, isn't it?
It is. And so here we are again. So I thought it was a fun opportunity to basically mention that if you are curious and that there is a visual representation of these podcast episodes that you might be interested in, we do have a YouTube channel. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, just FYI, there are video versions of these podcasts on our YouTube channel that we've just gotten up and running. We put all of them up there. And then if you're on YouTube, similarly, if you would like a podcast version of this, go find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you catch your podcasts. So definitely the objection we hear the most often, and this will come, I was going to say, in various forms from various folks throughout the organization. It's not always just the founder that says this, but it's often a founder who will say this specifically, which is we already know our customers. I know our customers. We talk to our customers all the time, or we've done customer research before. We can make these critical business decisions that we need to make without doing customer research because we know enough. And so, Claire, I was hoping you could sort of talk us through, why that might be problematic and why do we hear this so often? And why is that hella wrong, basically?
I thought you were going to say hell on wheels, but hella wrong is also good. First, I want to acknowledge something you raised that is, this often comes from someone who was on the founding team or at the C-suite level. And that happens because, and we covered this in a recent episode as well, that happens because early on, the founding team can often have pretty lucky swings in terms of what they know and what they can do with kind of intuitive customer knowledge. So whether this was a founding team that built the product to scratch their own itch for an industry they were already in or a role they'd already played, transitioning that founder knowledge or intuition to the rest of the team and enabling the rest of the team to be effective is where really that idea that we know enough starts to break down. So we were just talking with a head of product about this yesterday, during an office hours session. This head of product had joined a company and he'd been there for, I I think he said like 2 years,
Yeah.
and is doing his best, of course. And I say doing his best because I'm not judging anybody in this situation, but it's still an early days company, still very heavily founder-led sales. So where he's seeing that back up, or where he's seeing that cause problems, is, as he said to us, our website looks like somebody asked ChatGPT to write it, and maybe they did. Like, it doesn't get at any actual pains that somebody would feel that would bring them to this product. And the founder is also, like, this product manager is seeing his CEO bump up against this in sales as well. Like, it's very, very hard to be successful in sales conversations, know that they're talking to the right ICP in the first place. And this product manager is at a disadvantage because the CEO runs these sales calls, is able to intuit his way through them, but none of them are recorded. All of the information is up in his head. And so the rest of the team is just kind of floundering.
I think the picture that you're painting is of sort of one extreme, right? Where it's a product manager at a company that relies on founder-led sales. And the founder believes that between himself and like that early founding team, the team should know enough in order to make critical decisions.
Right.
Just because of how the team is currently structured and the conversations that are currently happening. I would say in a situation where the team is a little bit more mature and a little bit further along, sometimes I've seen that similar objection come up in that, like, we already know enough about our customers because we have so many customer conversations, and customer research or interviews happen relatively frequently by certain teams. So like the customer success team or the product team, right? Like, we talk to our customers all the time. What are you talking about? From the product team, where they might be having conversations around, certain features or like more UX focused type of research. And so they are making assumptions that because there are many conversations happening, they know enough about their customers to make these higher level, strategic decisions about their customers when they're sort of missing the forest for the trees, even though a lot of conversations are happening. So I wanted to sort of paint the picture that, like, it can happen in an early stage, smaller, all the way up to there's conversations all the time. Like, we're always having calls with our customers. And I think, again, like, just to not to repeat too much, but missing the forest for the trees, like getting that foundational understanding is so critical because your team changes, right? So that intuition or early learnings, early stage situation that you just described, Claire, is, obviously a big problem, but also like the team changes and evolves, people come and go. Your product also changes. So the value that your product provides to your customer base also changes. So even if you had that foundational understanding at one time, it could have very well changed as your product has evolved. The market, right? So how people make purchase decisions is completely different this year than it was even just last year. Like 1 year ago, 2 years ago, completely different sort of market as well. New competitors come into the market. There's a lot of forces of change in the market right now because of the economy, because of competition, because of how people make purchase decisions, people's expectations, and then how the individual might change.
There's a question that Bob Mesta sometimes leans on when he's talking to an executive about this concept of needing to better understand how customers make decisions. And I know, like, you've borrowed this one as well. I borrow it sometimes. But a team may know everything there is to know about their ICP, right? And how to target that person and reach them, the personas that exist within, like, the buying committee. But if the team doesn't really understand what pushes their ideal customer to wake up one day and say, today's the day I need to go searching for a new X, not knowing that is going to make everything else that your team is doing so much harder. There was a very similar situation going on when we spoke with Dan at Invoice Simple. Like, the Invoice Simple team runs on data. They know so much about who they're targeting. Like you said, lots of user research projects happening, lots of testing. But the core of why people chose their product versus any other product was still not super well defined or operationalized internally. And that was really the value of running the research that we ran with them, was equipping the team with a better sense of, okay, this type of customer purchases for reason A, and this type of customer purchases for reason B. And that can affect our messaging. It can affect the onboarding experience, where within the product we want to guide people. Yeah. So that, I don't know, people say psychographic, I guess, or jobs to be done understanding. If that's missing, then
you don't
your
know
team
enough
still
about
is
your customers.
then you don't know it. Exactly, right.
Yeah, because that's the missing critical piece of information, right? Like it's like the UX research, or A/B testing, or even the conversations that your customer success team might be having. It's true, your team might be really close to customers. You might have a very open dialogue with your customer base. Lots of conversations may be happening, but it's very easy to get lost, or, not to use this analogy again, but not be able to see like the forest for the trees, having all of those data points. So all of this said, this objection of we already know our customers, it's like, yes, but do you know that critical information about your customers? Do you have that context in which they make decisions, in which that need for your solution comes about in their life? You may know a lot about your customers, but do you know what is important to know?
Okay, so let me bring it to our next objection, which is a fear that research can take too much time, which is valid.
Super valid. 100%.
So what is your response when we're speaking with a team and they're like, is this going to be a make work project? Is this going to be like a study that means we can't get started on anything actually useful for the next like 2, 3, 4, 6 months?
Oh boy. Yeah. The research projects that I have been privy to in the last, I'll say like year and a half, have like scared the shit out of me. Like I cannot believe the scale at which some of these firms do research. So I can totally understand and empathize with teams and executives that fear the length of time that these types of projects can take. Like, I'm very impressed with what these firms do. Don't get me wrong. Like, it is, when what you're looking for is like scale, and like you want all the levels of depth, and you want that like quantitative, like cannot argue with type of research where like there isn't 1 ounce of doubt, and you have to have like every single base covered, and you're willing to invest, I was going to say tens of thousands, but it's more. I have seen some of these projects be upwards of like 50 to 75, 100 and more thousands of dollars. And not only the cost, but also the time investment, like months and months. So I can totally understand when somebody hears the word, especially executive that comes from like a not startup environment, that's like been part of or been at an org that has leveraged that type of market research. I can totally understand why they would be like, I'm not sure we want to go the route of like interviewing our customers or doing a big research project, because that might be what their experience was previously. So I totally get it. But what I would say in response to like, but it takes too much time, is it doesn't actually have to. You can take a very iterative approach to research, just like you would with product development. You don't have to do all of it at once. You don't have to take this like really broad strokes type of research where you're covering all your bases and you're doing like customer research, audience research, churn interview, customer competitive analysis, UX. You do not have to do all the types of research. What we tend to advocate for, and this will be, this will sound very familiar to those who are familiar with our material, but we are really focused on, and we encourage companies to be focused on like getting that foundational understanding first, and then layering on top of that. And so what I mean by that is like doing even just 10 customer interviews. 10 customer interviews, if run well, if done well, can get you really critical understanding and sort of foundational understanding to build upon. So again, just 10 conversations. That takes identifying a customer segment of customers to learn from, reaching out to them and seeing if they'd be willing to get on a 20 to 30 minute conversation with you, running those 10 to 12 conversations, and then like identifying the commonalities and the patterns between them. That can take a couple of weeks. I mean, our process, we do it in 4. I would say an internal team DIYing it could probably get it done in about 6 weeks. And again, when I describe that process, I'm saying like end to end, identifying the segment, doing the outreach, booking the calls, and parsing. You can get that done in a month. I mean, we can get it done in a month. Team DIYing it can probably get it done in that range. And that's just like, that's the ideal starting point. There are quicker wins If you are if you're a practitioner inside of a company, or and you're trying to get buy-in to do research, there are a couple of other sort of like easier, even lower touch wins that you can implement. One of the favorite ones that we like to, that I sometimes refer to as like the gateway drug into like doing research, is adding a question to your sign up form. So a very simple open text field question being added, where you ask, what was it that was going on in your world that led you to sign up today? Open text. It's one question. You can add it to like after the sign up form if you want to, so that it doesn't jeopardize the conversion rate on that, that first step. And just single a question, optional. Another alternative way to do this is a post sign up, sending an email, a plain text email with a single question. That's another way that you could get the same information from your new signups. And again, open text, it allows people to just say as much as they want to say and provide the context that they want to provide. And you can take all those responses and you can look for the patterns. And even just that information can give you a ton to go on, and it can get people really excited, especially when you start to see like meaningful patterns emerge. Bringing that back to the leadership team or to the team on the whole can do a lot for people to recognize the value of research and maybe even be open to like getting more in-depth insight. So that's one. Another one that I wanted to mention also was like, in the notes, it's like becoming BFFs with sales. So sitting in on sales calls, getting recordings of sales calls, listening for those pains, that job to be done, that trigger moment, looking for patterns in there that come up with like, again, that like what was going on in their world that led them to reach out. Looking for those types of things in sales call recordings can go a long way. And then another one that takes a little bit longer, but is still super, super fast, is a customer survey. So depending on how many customers you have, you can run a customer survey in like, honestly, it can be a batch send. You can get this thing out in a week. You can get responses back. Within 2 weeks, you've got, and again, within 2 weeks, you've got like meaningful responses that you can do something with. What I was going to say is a qualitative survey. So this isn't multiple choice. You're not giving them like drop down these open text fields so that you can capture that voice of customer. Even if you have, just a couple hundred customers, you can leverage a customer survey. You only need about 25 to 50 responses, like high quality responses. That can be super, super fast. So everything that I just said is in stark contrast to that $75,000, like 9 month long, market research project. You don't have to do all the things. You can start out with like gateway type of projects, like I mentioned, to a customer survey, to hell, just 10 to 12 conversations with your customers can be very low stakes, low risk type of research to start with. And then another thing that I wanted to mention related to the research takes too much time is like, it can be really motivating for the leadership team if you can tie that research project to a pain that the business is experiencing.
This actually goes back to the conversation we were having with this head of product yesterday, who's struggling to gather the customer insight that he needs because the executive team is so close to the customer and is making an assumption that like that's enough. But if he can successfully demonstrate that like with the right understanding, we could develop positioning and messaging that's going to bring in better qualified leads. It's going to help you, founder who's still running the sales calls, like achieve a higher win rate. And I'm being very simplistic here, but typically, even if you haven't articulated it for yourself, there is a reason that you are in need of or desiring these customer insights. So if you can connect that to a larger business problem, makes way more sense to invest the time in it from an executive perspective than a fun make work project.
What would you say to somebody who obviously asked that question, like how could 10 conversations possibly be enough to answer all of these questions that I have, but also to those who are like, give me the quant, where are the numbers?
I need that statistical significance.
Exactly. What do you say? What do you say to that objection?
So this just happened to me either earlier this week or last week. What is time? But we were kicking off a project and the CEO, the COO, head of success, head of marketing, they had all been in the conversation it was actually really cool. Like they had all read our book and then they reached out and they were like, we know that we need this. So that was lovely. But on the project kickoff call, it brought a team member who had just been hired in, and this person had no context on what we were doing. And so rightfully, they're asking all the questions to understand, like, Why are we doing this work? Why are we spending this time and this money on gathering this insight? And the project does involve running 10 to 12 interviews with their customers. And this new team member was like, 10 to 12? We have thousands of customers and we've been around for like 10 years. So how is learning, exactly as you said, from 10 people going to get us anything relevant? Thankfully, our incredible team member Heidi was on the call with me. Heidi is our research expert. And so she was able to like sprinkle her genius into the conversation. Mm-hmm. Where I think we need to set the context is first, what customers we are trying to learn from. So whether you have been around for a year or whether you've been around for 10 years, something that Gia, you brought up earlier is really important here. The competitive landscape changes over time. The buying situations that your customers are in change over time. Your product changes over time. So off the bat, it's important to establish that we're making a strategic decision to learn from the customers that we want to clone more of right now. In other words, we want to make sure that of these conversations we're having, we're gathering them from your customers who, number one, made the purchase decision recently enough that they remember life before and they purchased the product as close to its current state as it is today, right? So that's key, is learning from recent buyers, people who voted with their dollars and can tell you the full story of that buying experience. Additionally, they do need to be paying. So we don't want to be learning from people who are still in the trial process and haven't made a choice yet, or they churned. Churn interviews can be very valuable, but I'm not going to go there for this 10 to 12 conversation set. Again, we want to be learning from people we're trying to clone. And then finally, we want to be learning from people who meet those two criteria, paid recently, and they're using the product in a way that implies that they're getting value on an ongoing basis. So they're clearly happy with it. They've embedded it into, a day-to-day or week-to-week habit or workflow of some kind. So that set of criteria is going to surface a set of customers that you want to be learning from so that you can go out and acquire more people just like them who are going to come in, get it, want to pay for it, and adopt it. That's number one, is clarifying who we're trying to learn from here. Once we've done that, hopefully sets the stage for why 10 to 12 can be enough. And then beyond that, going back to the topic of, is 10 to 12 enough? Heidi uses a phrase that I love and have now started to borrow, pattern saturation. And this is going to take us back to the previous topic of learning just enough or gathering just enough customer insight to be effective and to form hypotheses that your team can run with. If you are running and running them well, if you are running 10 to 12 customer interviews, you are going to start to see enough patterns to be able to recognize the top, let's say 2 to 3 reasons people came to your product and chose you versus any other solution on the market. And will you potentially need to validate those hypotheses later down the line when you have tested them and you're like, okay, what do we do next? Sure. But 10 to 12 is enough. And I'll repeat myself from a moment ago. 10 to 12 is enough to equip your team with the insights they need to be dangerous or to be effective, again, in a nicer way of saying it.
If I'm not mistaken, Bob Mesta also runs 10 to 12 jobs to be done interviews for consumer products, massive consumer products. And he will run 10 to 12 interviews because it is enough to identify those patterns in a meaningful enough way. I don't think he's got like this hard line. As long as the pattern saturation, again, to use that term, is strong enough, then there's a point where running more interviews does not yield you any more benefit. And it's the same thing, by the way, with the customer, those like qualitative customer surveys that I mentioned earlier. The same is true there as well. And at a completely different level, and you obviously do not get the depth, but after about 50 high quality responses, the patterns just stop, right? No new patterns emerge. And so you've reached the point of like, I'm not going to learn anything else, so it's not worthwhile. I remember a conversation we had a while ago with a couple of researchers on the team who were talking about running customer surveys and parsing hundreds of surveys, hundreds. And we were like, what, why, what are you doing? Like you can't. you couldn't possibly be learning anything new. And it's like, yep, validated after about 50, genuinely no new patterns.
All right. So I will bring us to the fourth very common objection that we hear. And this one has been coming up more recently, which is a company is moving into a different market. And that can mean like 2 to 3 different things. So we'll clarify. But there's this feeling internally of, well, how can we possibly learn anything of value from our existing customers if we are bringing our product into a market we don't currently serve, or if we're launching a product that our current customers are not using, are not paying for? Like, what is there possibly to be learned from our current customer base in those situations? So I'm very curious if you have examples you want to share, because again, I know you and I have encountered this more recently. I want to hear your theory. I want to hear, what are your thoughts?
My theory as to why we've been hearing it more, and by the way, I don't want to pretend that we didn't hear this, a few years ago, because we definitely did, but I have been on a couple of calls recently where the founder or the CEO on the call is like, we're moving into a new market and our existing customer base doesn't represent where we want to go. And my theory is that I think people are getting a little bit existential right now, especially in SaaS. I mean, people have been getting existential in SaaS since COVID, right? I mean, that turned the many markets on its head. Some died overnight, some exploded. So that was a big shift. Everybody was repositioning. Everybody was sort of rethinking. The economy more recently has led SaaS to be more focused on profit and resilience and efficiency. And so I think those shifts have led a lot of founders to realize that they need to change the way that they're doing things. And so for some companies, that means launching a new product altogether. So their old, legacy, maybe they've been around for a few years. I don't want to say old as in like outdated, but their original, software product that they brought to market isn't growing like it used to. There's this feeling that it may not be as relevant, or it's outdated, or it's like drowning in technical debt potentially. And the leadership team recognizes that there's an opportunity to do something new. Because they've heard rumblings and, they've had ideas that they've been excited about for a few years, and now's the time to actually do it. And so they're launching a completely new product. Or sometimes there's a situation where they're like, we've been serving this market for X amount of, years, and we really think that we should be serving a different market for X number of reasons. A lot of reasons, right? Like, some markets change to the point where they just don't have the budget anymore, or the need or the competitive space has changed to the point where they're just not competitive anymore in that market, and they want to shift markets slightly. And by the way, I'm sure I'm not mentioning a plethora of other reasons why this might be going on. But that's my theory, is that like things have just changed so much over the past, I'll say, 4 years, that executive teams are really reevaluating their strategy. So all of that to say, the answer to this objection is different depending on those two situations. Again, the two situations being we're moving into a different market with the same product, or the other situation, which is we're launching a whole new product. And if you're launching a whole new product, my question in response to that objection back is usually something along the lines of, do you have any customers in your existing customer base with your current product that could be potential customers for this new offering? If so, they're a gold mine, because why would you go out and do market research or audience research with people who you have no relationship with whatsoever, when you have these relationships already established with customers of your existing product? Even if it's a small segment, I mean, we already just mentioned multiple times now, you only need to have a handful or like a dozen conversations. And so even if you have even a small segment of your existing customer base that would be a potential fit for this new offering, they are who you should be talking to. Again, you've got an established relationship with them, but you are also pre-qualifying them to be potential customers of this new offering of yours. You're learning what you need to learn. You're doing that market research about that need, that job to be done, that potential need for that new product offering, but also you're qualifying potential customers at the same time.
So you've described the benefit of talking to an existing customer base if there is a new product that a company is planning to bring to market, because as you said, you have an existing relationship with your current customers. Why would you go out to a market that doesn't know you and has no has no affinity for you or your brand. But then there's the inverse of that, which is we want to bring our current product to a new market. And how do we address that challenge?
So I would say usually in that situation, there is an overlap. There's an overlapping opportunity there where there are some customers in the customer base that is representative of this new market. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes it's like the same type of organization, but just a different, I'll call it persona because we've talked about personas, but a different, individual inside of that business that this company is moving towards. So away from a functional user more to an economic buyer, or away from an economic buyer more into a functional user, or to a different department altogether. So like an adjacent team. And I don't know that I've ever had a conversation with a company that wants to change markets so dramatically that they have no existing customers that are representative. I don't think ever. Not to say it's not possible, but I've never heard that. And so in this case, similarly, it is highly likely that there are, if you think about it and you take the time to look at your existing, book of business or existing customer base, if there's anybody in there that is representative of that new market, even if they weren't the person that championed the purchase of your existing offering, or they have a relationship with them, or even if they could just make an intro to that person, you have an opportunity for similar reasons, right? They have an established relationship with you. You have their name, you have their phone number, they know who you are. You've got that established relationship to lean on to ask to have those conversations. But again, I will say that's also never been the situation that I've experienced where the customer is so different that you don't have anybody representative. In some situations, it is a geographic shift. The difference between like moving into an American market from a Canadian market, not relevant enough. I would say your Canadian customers are probably similar enough to your American customers where you can get away. European to US, probably a little bit different. And in that case, yeah, you might want to rely on some audience research of, some similar or look-alike customers. In the example, if you're in a European-based SaaS wanting to move into the American market, you might want to look for look-alike customers and do some audience research. And I know, Claire, that a couple of times you've had conversations around like other types of tools that you could potentially use.
Right. I know Bob and the Rewired team, when they're working with a company in that situation, they will go through, a platform like respondent.io, which lets you filter research participants by a lot of different criteria, but they focus primarily on B2B, which is, useful for the world that you and I hang out in. And then lots of different like role, like you said, geographic location, all kinds of things like that.
Ask your target market is a good one too. There's a few. Winter might also be an option as well to get like sort of a lookalike type of customer to test messaging with. But again, I just want to bring it back to what I was just saying before. It is very rare. I don't know if I've ever had a conversation with a founder or CEO that wants to make such a dramatic shift in market that their current customer base doesn't have any representation in that target market at all. Like none. There's usually a small group of customers that are representative of where they want to go, that are qualified to learn from, versus going these other routes, which are it's more like audience research, and they're less qualified in that they haven't made a purchase decision with you. You don't know for sure that they actually do have the problem that your product solves. And usually there's an opportunity to do customer research anyway.
There are other resources that we have put together before that go further into this topic.
One of our first podcast episodes was called Identifying Your Customer Blind Spots and Whether You Have Them. That was a really good one. And then another good one too was the pitfalls of poorly run research. So let's say you're like, hey, fine, I had all these objections coming into this episode, and now you've satisfied all these objections, and I'm fine, I'm bought in. That how not to mess up your research episode would probably be a good one. And then if you really want to get sort of your juices flowing and how customer research can then be operationalized and all the things that it can do, I would definitely suggest the segmentation episode. That was a more recent one. Or check out, that LinkedIn article that was posted that the feedback on has been fantastic. And hopefully it's helpful in helping you sort of like visualize and figure out like how this type of research can be useful to you and your team.
And I think if there are additional questions you have after all of those other resources have been exhausted, reach out to us at forgetthefunnel.com. Pretty accessible. All right. Catch you next time.
And that's it for this episode of the Forget the Funnel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions about the topics we covered, don't hesitate to contact Claire or I on LinkedIn, and you can also visit our website at forgetthefunnel.com. This is still a new podcast for us, so ratings, reviews, and subscriptions in your podcast platform of choice make a huge difference. See you next time.